welcome. Today, digital crime and punishment. Citizens around the globe are rebelling against petty corruption with websites like IPaidABribe.com. We'll see how anti-corruption crowdsourcing is doing in Kenya and elsewhere. Meanwhile, Occupy Wall Streeters are finding their tweets used against them in court. Turns out 140 characters can make for a long sentence. Also today, the Brooklyn Grange. Rooftop farming comes to Brooklyn on a grand scale. And speaking of mudslinging, the presidential race is heading straight for New York. Let's tackle that first. Often it's all over by Super Tuesday, but the Empire State holds its presidential primary April 24th this year. That's less than a month away now, and the results could matter. Mitt Romney, who wants to lock up the nomination before the August GOP convention, expects to win a majority of New York's 95 delegates, but his rivals show no signs of throwing in the towel. Can a relatively moderate Republican take New York for granted here in 2012? Does this mean we are in for a month of those ugly negative attack ads funded by super PACs? And what about those other New York primary races for the U.S. Senate and for Albany? Joining us, Mickey Carroll, director of the Quinnipiac Polling Institute, Andrew Hawkins, managing editor of the City and State newspaper, and on Skype, Ben Smith, editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed. Hi all, welcome to the show.
Ryan, good to be here, as usual.
Mickey, who do New York Republicans want for president?
Romney. Well, for president.
For president.
They want Obama. Who do they want to nominate? They want Romney.
Who do New York Republicans want for president was my question.
I'm sorry. Okay, New York wants Obama, and it's in his pocket as far as I can tell. But as far as the last Quinnipiac poll was about a month ago, and Brian, a month ago, the way things are going could be 25 years ago. It showed it showed Romney up 32-20 over Santorum. But Santorum won't go away. And you know the rules are, as usual in New York, a little bit complicated. You know, Andrew, we've got 29 districts, except we don't have 29 districts anymore, but we're going to have the vote in 29 districts.
Congressional districts.
Yes, congressional districts.
We lost one, or was it two, in the 2010 census.
But the count is going to be done in the 29 districts. But the count, there'll be a statewide count and separate counts in each of the districts.
So New York is not a winner-take-all state, so it will be delegated out proportionally based on how the candidates perform in each of those districts.
And that's what the Republicans wanted this year, to keep things interesting longer, but it turns out they're keeping things too interesting too long for their presumed nominees. Good.
It seems that way. I'm sure it's going on a lot longer than Mitt Romney would prefer it to be, but I think the way things stand now, and I have to agree with Mickey, Romney is just much stronger on the ground in New York than Rick Santorum or Newt Gingrich. But obviously Santorum and Gingrich look like they want to keep things going all the way to the convention in August in Tampa, so it looks like he's still going to have to fight for those votes.
And Ben, presumably, New York would be Romney country as compared to Santorum or Gingrich or Paul, but our last Republican gubernatorial nominee was Carl Palladino. So what does that tell us?
Well, it
tells you the Republican primary voters everywhere, are more conservative than you'd expect. We're not talking about random people off the street in New York. We're talking about the most committed conservative Republicans who, do have this real anti-establishment streak that Carl Palladino tapped into last time around. Mitt Romney is sort of a Rick Lazio Republican, a moderate who's been unable to really rally the base. But there isn't somebody with the kind of zany energy of Palladino, and the moment is so different. Palladino was one of a wave of these anti-establishment Tea Party candidates, and I think, Romney represents partly the reaction against that kind of politics, and the moderates are a little more animated now and are showing up for him.
So, Mickey, on the polling that you do, can you get a sense of, if the election were held today, the likely split of delegates? What percentage, since it's not winner take all?
Understand how it's going to work. There's going to be 54 delegates will be chosen district by district, 2 per district, 29 districts, which again don't exist. We're now 27. Anyway, and then the others will be statewide.
That would be 58. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, well, 58 for the districts, and then 34 statewide.
Right.
And it's what do they call them?
Delegates at large, super delegates.
Yeah, super.
Making 95.
My guess, and Brian, it's only a guess now. Yeah, sure, Quinnipiac polled a month ago, and then it was Romney up. But are there districts where Santorum might somehow or other have strength? I don't know. We're starting right now, as a matter of fact, to poll again, and even that will be, okay, we'll say here's where it is now, but don't forget, Brian, a few months ago, we were asking those kind of questions, and people like Newt Gingrich or Perry or Bachmann, people said, if it's vote today, would you vote for them? Frankly, I hate to knock a poll, my own poll, but I don't think that when they were answering that question, they were really answering that question. I think the question was, the answer was, we feel like there ought to be something. So that who would you vote for today? I'm not sure. That, frankly, is a valid measure.
And who remembers Herman Cain? But, but Andrew, what,
999.
what about the different districts? Can you say there are rural New York Republicans, where there have always been Republicans, that would tend to be more pro-Santorum because he tends to win rural and Romney tends to win urban on a national basis? Is the same going to hold true in New York? And of course, we have a lot of suburban Republicans.
No, absolutely.
Outside New York.
There are your conservative Republican districts. There are your moderate Republican districts. There are your conservative rural Republican districts. They sort of span the gamut. And the thing that is also very interesting to note is that we just redrew what all of those districts look like. Right. So there's going to be some districts that maybe look a little bit different from the last time that some of these candidates took a look at them. Might have more conservative voters, might have more liberal, more urban voters in them. That's something that I think Romney, Santorum, Gingrich are all going to have to take into account when they're sort of in their war rooms, looking at their whiteboard with their map and trying to pick exactly where their support's going to be.
Right. So, Ben Smith, are we going to see a month or a few weeks of horrible attack ads taking over our television screens?
You know, I think those of you who live in Albany may. I think you're going to see these attack ads up where the television is cheap and where in New York City, Romney is just going to romp, I think, and Rick Santorum just doesn't have the money to compete here. It's so expensive to buy television downstate. I think our lucky neighbors, you know, in the southern tier and way out in western New York, may get some of those attack ads interrupting their television viewing.
And Andrew, how about New York City? We assume it's a Democratic stronghold in general, but we did just see Bob Turner win Anthony Weiner's seat.
Sure.
And now there's still a contested election.
That's true,
Special election that was still held that also in Brooklyn, a Republican might win that.
Yeah, it's still up in the air in the moment. They're waiting to do a final count of the absentee ballots at the end of this week. But at the moment, the Republican, David Storabin, who's a novice at best, he's a lawyer, he has no experience in politics at all, is up just a little bit over 100 votes over his Democratic opponent, Lou Fidler, who was in the city council for over a decade, well-versed in Democratic Brooklyn politics, was expected to take this thing away handedly and did not. So the fact that Republicans like Storabin, like Bob Turner, back in September in Anthony Weiner's old district have performed as well as they have, sort of you have to recalculate what's going on here.
What does it tell us about?
I would just say that I think you're seeing the birth of a new Jewish Republican politics, driven by Russian immigrants, by Orthodox Jews, which are both, as a portion of the American Jewish community, growing really fast, as the secular Democratic Jews do not grow so fast. And I think, that's a lot of what's going on in South Brooklyn, but I think it won't end in South Brooklyn.
It's true. Yeah, the Orthodox Jewish population down there is sort of, they're angry about the passage of gay marriage in New York, and so there's a sort of a reaction to that going on. There's also a lot going on in those communities with regards to the need for government assistance, government support for education, for social services. So that plays a lot into it. Israeli policy, Obama's attitude towards Israel, his friendship towards Israel, really played in Bob Turner's favor during that race. But both that race and the Senate race, the state Senate race, were special elections, and those are unique in sort of the ability for organizational politics to come into play there.
Relatively small organized groups
absolutely.
To turn out and have.
So it could be a lot.
But also,
different.
most of your Jewish votes are registered Democratic. So they are. They might vote in a special election.
Right. They can vote any way they want.
In a Republican primary, they're outside looking in.
Most New York Jews will vote Democratic, but in certain pockets of the city, it may be different
Sure,
neighborhood
but
by
we're talking
neighborhood.
a Republican primary, so they're irrelevant in a Republican primary.
Oh, if they're registered Democrats, right.
Well, they are.
Do your polls at Quinnipiac reflect anything yet about the Asian American vote in New York City and where that might trend? Because I could see in theory, whereas especially some of the Chinese communities flushing out through Bayside, Douglaston, into Great Neck as you go out of the city, as people become more affluent historically from whatever group, they have more assets to protect. They tend to vote Republican more than they did before. Is that happening, or could it happen?
Brian, the answer is yes. Our polls don't reflect it or haven't reflected it yet because your Asian population, unlike your black population, which is packed in because of ghettoization, but yeah, there are a lot, just take the subway. There are just an awful lot more Asian residents, Asian registered in New York and New Jersey. And so yeah, they count. And one of these days, you know, it's not going to be just John Lew. One of these days, you're going to get a districts that at least are heavily
Right.
Asian.
Well, we see the congressional district under the new lines that Gary Ackerman is retiring from, slightly redrawn, and now that's, I think, a third Asian and has at least one.
It's about
Asian-
40%. Yeah, it's
40%.
about 40% Asian.
And that's those very neighborhoods that I was talking about, Eastern
Yeah.
Queens and Western Nassau.
Right. The way that the federal judge drew the lines when the federal judge, they took the power away from the legislature to draw those lines. They really packed in those neighborhoods so that making that
Right.
a district where an Asian candidate could really come out and win one. And we've got a candidate, Grace Meng, who's an assemblywoman who's been endorsed by the Queens Democratic Party, running for that seat to replace Gary Ackerman. She stands a pretty good chance at winning. Not the best, though, because we have two other Democrats in the race and a Republican waiting in.
But that is an instance of a party anticipating where things are going.
Yeah.
In other words, the Asian population, the political establishment has decided deserves some sort of recognition. So they're going to get it. Remember all those years, Brian, when the black population deserved the borough president of Brooklyn, of Manhattan, and it was given to them. So that's the way it's going to happen.
Well, at least the party establishment endorsed a black nominee.
Exactly.
People had to go out and vote for him.
Yeah,
but is there a Republican surge in those neighborhoods? And again, we're talking Northeast Queens, Northwest.
I think the
Nassau,
closer
not so much.
Yeah, the closer you get out into the suburbs, into Nassau, towards the Long Island sort of divide between Long Island and Brooklyn, I think you find a lot more conservative voters. The question is whether or not those votes are sort of spread out amongst a couple of districts the way that it is now.
Ben, let's talk about the Gillibrand race. Senator Gillibrand, wait, didn't she just run? Yes, she did. She was appointed, and then she had to run in a special election to keep her seat. Now she runs for her full 6-year elected term if she wins, and there are 3 Republicans vying to run against them, and one of them is the guy we just mentioned, the Anthony Weiner district killer, Bob Turner.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough race for a Republican at this point. I mean, because it's a presidential year, there's just going to be a ton of Democrats turning out to vote the Democratic Party line, which Gillibrand, who after kind of a rocky start is looking pretty strong, is going to be on. And so I think that's, Bob Turner, it's sort of up or out or out or out. He doesn't have much. He doesn't really have a path in any direction. So you see the logic to his running, but this is really a symbolic campaign.
And the other 2, Ben, one of them is Wendy Long, no relation to the Conservative Party chairman Mike Long, but the Conservative Party is endorsing her, right?
Right, and she took this sort of ill-advised shots at Gillibrand for being too attractive, which seems like kind of a rough approach. It just doesn't. There's a long tradition of really disastrous Republican statewide candidates at this point, and these guys seem to be in that tradition.
But I think it shows where the Republican Party is right now. They feel that in order to their only chance at knocking Gillibrand out is a woman voter, as a woman candidate. That they really feel like that's going to be their best chance here.
But they also haven't got a bench. There's just not a prominent figure coming out of business, coming out of political life, who people know who they are and can step in there and say, I'm a serious person, take me seriously. They just haven't met that bar.
So, Ben, nationally, does that mean that we're just dividing up into regions as a country, and New York is just so blue that even though there's a conservative surge in a lot of places in the last few years, that New York is just immune to it, and some other parts of the country might be immune to a Democratic surge?
No, I think these things ebb and flow. I mean, I think, in fact, the national conservative surge in a weird way makes it harder for the Republicans to nominate the kind of moderate who can win here. You saw that with Palladino. As the Republican base gets stronger, that the Republican base in New York is going to nominate people like Carl Palladino, unlike George Pataki. But I think you'll see that recede. You'll see the kind of pro-choice, moderate Mike Bloomberg Republican, who a lot of Republicans don't really love, but who can actually go head-to-head with a Democrat who represents the establishment, who represents the inside, who represents the past as these things go on.
Ben Smith, thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
To finish up with you guys, Mickey, whatever happened to the moderate Republicans a la Jacob Javits, Nelson Rockefeller in New Jersey, Tom Kaine Sr.?
A lot of them moved out. Not only that, Brian, Republicans won in 2010 some seats in New York that they shouldn't have won. 2010 was a funny year. 2012, look, the head of the ballot is going to be the president. It's a Democratic state. And as far as I can tell, maybe you have seen it differently, but I don't see any signs that there is any Republican Party in New York. There are Republican successes, the congressional candidates who won, but they didn't win it because the Republican Party got behind them. They won it on their own. And that's, things may change.
Or take a look at something like, you have the Republican State Senate. It's sort of only in existence because it's been endorsed by the governor of the state, Andrew Cuomo. He allows them to continue to serve in the majority because he signs the maps that they've drawn for themselves to keep themselves in power. So this is sort of a microcosm of how Republicans keep power in New York. It's only because maybe Democrats allow them to have it.
Does Cuomo get something, even as a Democratic governor, by having a split legislature?
Sure.
The Democrats in the Assembly, the Republicans in the Senate?
Sure, absolutely. He gets to play them off of one another.
But not only that, Brian, he also gets people you can deal with. Mm-hmm. The Democratic leadership of the state Senate is not what you would call high-powered. In other words, Cuomo can deal with the Republicans. The Democrats are all over the lot in the first place. In the second place, they don't have any leadership. That's
Sheldon Silver?
No, that's
on the Assembly side.
In the Senate.
Yes.
And it's Sheldon Silver is a redoubtable, tough, very effective guy. But the Republicans, the Democrats in the state Senate.
Look what happened in 2009 with the coup and sort of
with
the Pedro Espada, Hiram Montserrat, these names.
Yeah. Andrew, any other local races that we should mention? There are going to be 4 elections in New York this year, right? There's the presidential primary April 24th. There's a congressional primary in June. Then our usual primary 8 days after Labor Day. Who's running in that?
There's going to be a lot of electoral exhaustion, I think, in New York, and I think you might lose a lot of votes that way, which is a shame because it's the democratic process here. But I think one to watch in particular, aside from that open congressional seat in Queens, is going to be the Charlie Rangel race in northern Manhattan. I think he stands a really good chance at winning, but the way that his district was redrawn and during this last redistricting process includes a lot more Latino voters in that district. The population there has really grown. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they come out. He's got a couple of challengers, most notably State Senator Adriano Espaillat, who's Dominican. He could be the first Dominican elected member of Congress from New York. That's significant. So how that turns out and whether or not that sort of tells us what that district or who is going to represent that district after Rangel eventually leaves.
And those are primaries, but also we're talking about
these,
the general election, the upstate and Hudson Valley, and of course Staten Island, where you elected Republicans. Brian, if
they may turn.
Oh, not only may, they almost, I think they almost certainly will.
Many moving parts in elections 2012 in New York State. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Coming up, anti-corruption crowdsourcing like IPaidABribe.com.
When you earn your GED diploma, the barriers in your life fall. Earn your GED diploma and begin your brighter future.
Traditional light bulbs actually generate 9 times more heat than light. Switch to Energy Star light bulbs, and you'll realize just how much cash you were really burning through. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at energysavers.gov.
In countries around the world, petty bribery is a fact of life. A little palm greasing is needed to achieve the most basic day-to-day tasks, from renewing a driver's license to even paying your taxes. But websites are springing up to document and fight this kind of corruption by allowing people to report anonymously the bribes they are forced to pay. In Kenya, Anthony Ragui founded just such a site. It's called I Paid a Bribe. He's with us via Skype from Nairobi to tell us more. Also joining the discussion is Ben Elers, Director of Programs for the corruption watchdog group Transparency International. He is in Berlin. Welcome both of you to our program. Hello from New York.
Thank you for having me.
And
hello from Nairobi.
First question to Nairobi. Tell us about I Paid a Bribe.
I Paid a Bribe is thank you for having me on board. I Paid a Bribe is a site that I started to be able to harness the collective energy of Kenyans to be able to share their bribe stories.
What are some of the most common bribe stories that you hear?
The most common bribe stories, as Ben will tell you, are stories about the police stopping people and asking for money for traffic offenses, stories from the Nairobi City Council, or basically the municipal councils, when they're asking for bribery for building approvals, immigration department asking for bribes for getting a passport or a work permit or something like that.
Ben, are these the most common bribes that are demanded around the world? Transparency International, obviously by its name, works globally.
Yes, that's right. I mean, in our we receive a number of complaints, and our top 3 areas of complaints are judiciary, land use, and police.
Judiciary. Tell us more about that, because if there's one place that people think they should be able to get an honest hearing, it's in court.
Well, that's the biggest problem. It shows how insidious the whole thing is. The judiciary, it's like laws not implemented, judges bribed, justice delayed, you name it. And it happens in countries all over the world.
Anthony, what happens after somebody reports a bribe on IPaidABribe.com? Can you take action in any way, or are you just documenting?
Actually, sorry, Brian, to correct you. My site is ipaidabribe.or.ke. IPaidABribe.com is the Indian site. However, what we've done is that we're trying to engage with other players in the market, particularly the press, because they play a really large part in informing the common public of what's going on. But also we're talking to the new commission in Kenya called the Commission of Administration of Justice. There's the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, and those are the bodies we're trying to engage so that whatever information is shared on the site can actually be used to make a difference in different government departments or ministries.
So, Ben, I just made that mistake about the web address for Anthony, and when you, Ben, were on my radio show, as you know, we were speaking with the organizer of IPaidABribe.com, which was from India. So is there kind of an I Paid a Bribe movement now around the world?
Absolutely. They're springing up all over the place, and this can only be a good thing. We operate similar kind of sites in about 7 countries. But the key thing is not just the websites, it's that the people are standing up and saying enough is enough. We've had enough of this corruption. And that it demonstrates that people will get involved when they're provided with simple, credible, and viable mechanisms to do so. And this is fantastic.
So, Anthony, can people who post on I Paid a Bribe get in touch with each other? Can a kind of community of anonymous posters start to develop, which might give them some power to fight the endemic corruption?
You see, the thing about this, Brian, is that this is anonymous reporting, so nobody knows, unless it's my friends and I are sharing this information. Nobody knows who's sharing the information. However, what I truly believe is that when people start sharing this information, corruption actually creates their own networks. So what we're trying to say is that people who do not pay bribes and people who don't believe in corruption can then create their own networks, which are going to be anti-corruption networks. Now, that is a very powerful movement that can be able to change things. I think I saw a comment from Ben a short while ago where he says in Tunisia, it took one guy to put himself on fire to make a difference. And I think that's the same thing we're talking about here in Kenya or in Africa, that we can get one person to make a difference. Just to add on the point that Ben talked about is that I'm right now talking to Ghana and to Zimbabwe and to a few other countries who are looking at me to be able to help them develop the same sites in those countries.
Ben, are there countries that your group ranks or rates as the most corrupt or the least corrupt, or don't you get involved at that level?
No, we do have an annual corruption perceptions index, and as Anthony knows, Kenya comes out quite badly on this. I think 154th out of 183 countries.
Are there conditions that are common to the most bribery-prone countries?
Absolutely, they tend to be. There tends to be a lot of poverty, very weak institutions. Many of the countries have suffered years of civil conflict or political unrest. The pattern is quite depressing and similar throughout many of the countries who do the worst.
Do you want to talk about that in the case of Kenya, Anthony?
I think what Ben says is correct. We actually rated very badly in terms of corruption. But I think more than anything else, that corruption actually is petty. I don't even talk about, in my country, for example, people only talk about corruption when you're talking about major issues of corruption. And it's become such a common thing. I mean, some of the stories you read on the website are people who are actually talking about corruption as if it's a no and day-to-day thing. They're so accepting of it. And until we change that perception that it's not fine to pay a bribe, it's not fine to accept corruption, then we'll not make any change. And you see, petty bribery goes to the level of society where people can't afford services. It affects the people who have no money. It affects the services that we get. So it's actually very endemic in the people who are really poor, as Ben said.
I think that's a really important answer in this interview. And Ben, I wonder if you would speak to it too, because some people may be watching and thinking, well, okay, this petty bribery, a few dollars here and there to get this and that service done, it's a bad thing, but it's sort of the cost of doing business. The real bribery problems are things like campaign finance reform in this country, which affects how the whole healthcare system works, or whether we go to war, and huge things like that. So do you want to reemphasize the importance of petty corruption in addition to other forms?
Hey, look, I mean, issues such as campaign finance as well. I mean, we also campaign against, and these are critical issues. So I don't want to underplay this. But I mean, if you look at a few years ago, there was some airlines were bombed in Russia, some domestic airlines. I mean, it's well documented that people were paying bribes to get onto to take bombs onto the flights. If you're in earthquake zones where houses are not constructed properly because of people have been able to pay for licenses, and then the buildings collapse and people die. I mean, this is not just tea money for rural police. This is serious stuff which kills people.
And not just tea money, Anthony, also because civil servants, police and otherwise, are very poorly paid in Kenya and many developing countries. I've heard that that's one of the underlying causes for this, low pay of the civil servants. And so they start fleecing people, fleecing their neighbors in many cases, just to make ends meet.
Yeah, that's very correct, Ben. I want to say something, to add something to the question you asked, Brian, sorry. I want to add something to what Ben was saying earlier in the question you asked. Now, one of the things that I'm doing with the site is I'm actually starting a GIS mapping element in it. And because we are coming to the election period in our country, one of the things that happens is that people pay bribes to get votes. People buy voter cards. corruption becomes, bribery becomes one of the biggest issues during the election time. So what I'm hoping is that on the site, we can have a real-time way of showing where the bribes are being paid. Because what the Election Commission has been given the power in the new constitution is to be able to actually disqualify people who pay bribes. So I'm hoping that that can be something that can be very helpful to the Kenyans in my country. Now, to add to your point is that I don't think the excuse of people not being paid well is an excuse to accept a bribe. However, that's the problem is that we think it's okay that because a policeman is underpaid, it's okay for him to take a bribe. Now, my question I keep asking, this policeman accepts a bribe from what we call in my country matatus, which are sort of minibuses that carry people. And that matatu goes and crashes and kills 50 people, or crashes into a school bus and kills students. Whose fault is it? Is it the fault of the students, or is it the fault of the policeman who took a bribe?
Fair enough, and the question answers itself. Ben, before you go, since you do rank countries, how does the United States do on Transparency International's list of corrupt countries?
It does pretty well. It's not at the top, but it's doing relatively well. But in the States as well, there are problems, and you know them, and I'm sure somebody from our group would be very happy to talk to you in detail about them at another time.
I guess I'm curious, at the retail level, not the big public policy level, is retail corruption more in the private sector here compared to the public sector? I'm thinking, for example, of organized crime. Maybe the person most likely to receive a bribe from a run-of-the-mill New Yorker is a member of an organized crime syndicate.
That could well be. I mean, I can't really comment on the situation of retail corruption or petty corruption in the United States, except to say that in our surveys, it's clear that it does exist, albeit at not as high a level as in Kenya.
Thank you both very much. Let's hope that social media winds up, in fact, fighting corruption, and that airing it out is part of the key to eliminating it. I appreciate you both joining us from Germany and from Kenya, respectively.
Thank you very much.
Now, if you're occupying the street, watch what you tweet. Coming up next.
Well, I first started skating with my friend. He had an extra board, and then he just gave it to me, and I've been skating ever since. Well, when I don't land a trick and I have my mind set on something and I'm not getting what I want, I just keep going for it until I get it right. My mom, she didn't go to college, so she wants me to experience that whole thing, and so I could end up getting like a good job. I think to get into college, I'll have to be determined, just like when I want to get a new trick, and skating's helped me realize I've got what it takes.
Cotton balls. Duct tape. Spoon. Needle. Thread. Scalpel.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
This past weekend, Occupy Wall Street protesters were arrested in a march held to protest police tactics. One of those tactics, using social media as evidence in prosecuting Occupy protesters. The Manhattan DA's office has subpoenaed the Twitter accounts of at least 4 occupiers. And here to look at this novel tactic of prosecution and what it could mean for the protesters and for privacy in general is Tamer El-Ghobashy. He's a criminal justice reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Is this a novel kind of prosecution tool?
In terms of a case involving protesters, and most of them have been charged with it's not even a misdemeanor, it's certainly not a felony, it's a violation of disorderly conduct. I think what's surprising people in this case is that prosecutors are using this very well-known and often used tool of issuing subpoenas for people's, whether it's a journalist's notebook or as we saw in the Galleon case, people's instant messaging chats that were used against some of the defendants in that case.
Those are very different, aren't they? A journalist's notebook would presumably be much more protected under the First Amendment, confidentiality with sources, than something like in the Galleon case if there's a suspected crime.
And here what they're saying is that there was a violation and you've chosen now to go to trial rather than accept a plea agreement, in essence, an ACD, which is an adjournment in contemplation of dismissal, which has been offered in most of these cases, and there are about just under 2,000. Of those 2,850 people took these ACDs, and about 257 cases were dismissed because of lack of evidence. So what we're seeing now is that the cases that are going forward, prosecutors are using all the tools at their disposal, and yes, it's not novel to subpoena a person's Twitter account or their Facebook, and in fact, Twitter and Facebook do have policies on how they deal with this.
Who is served with a subpoena? Is it Twitter, the company, served by the Manhattan DA?
It is indeed Twitter, the company. And what I think these protesters are discovering, much to their surprise and much to the general public's surprise, is that your tweets are considered the property of Twitter. I mean, they may be you saying it, but Twitter ultimately owns this, and this is why they are being subpoenaed as witnesses. And the idea is, on the prosecutor's end, is that if you keep having dismissals because of a lack of evidence, and in essence that means the arresting officer could not identify that person subsequently as the person that was engaging in this alleged illegal activity on the Brooklyn Bridge, for instance, they will use those tweets in order to establish intent, that you said perhaps something like, I am going to take the bridge, or you were aware of a police order not to go onto the bridge's roadway. Now, the defense in a lot of the Brooklyn Bridge cases has been, well, the police led us onto the bridge, and it appeared as though they were giving us permission to be there, and then subsequently arrested us.
And does Twitter have a team of lawyers resisting the Manhattan DA and saying, no, 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 this is Twitter's property, this is not yours to take just because you want to?
No, ultimately Twitter has very well-established rules, and they were in fact praised for their handling of a similar case in a much bigger national security issue when the Justice Department did subpoena the tweets of WikiLeaks and their associated followers. And what Twitter and the Justice Department did say, you may not inform your users of these subpoenas. Now, Twitter came back and said, no, it's our express policy that if you are going to subpoena our users' private information, we are obligated to inform them of this. So Twitter's not fighting back. All it's saying is telling its users, your information has been subpoenaed. We will release it unless you tell us, no, we plan on fighting or appealing this subpoena, or as it's known in the legal community, seeking to quash the subpoena.
There's an interesting question here, it seems to me, about the line between public and private. If defendants are saying, no, what I tweet out is private, there's also the fact that Twitter is public. You're tweeting it to your followers with the intention, or at least the assumption, that it's going to be shared. It's social media, and it's going to go and go and go and go and go.
Right. And Twitter does make that clear in its user agreement that you are tweeting publicly, unless, of course, you make your account private. But and the Manhattan DAs have made this point that these are public tweets, and that they're not seeking anything that hasn't been broadcast on the internet and that's widely available to anyone on the internet, even if you're not a Twitter user. What they're saying is that we need these records subpoenaed, first of all, to link a person to that account. So the personal information, whether it's an IP address, whether they use it mobile or from a desktop, is to use to establish the person's identity and perhaps where they were. And secondly, it's people tweet at one tweet per minute, so they become buried, and it's often very difficult to access old tweets. So what the DA's office is saying, we need these tweets saved. Also to prevent people from perhaps deleting accounts or changing account names or deleting certain tweets that may end up becoming incriminating in this case.
Twitter has been such a powerful organizing tool for the Occupy movement. Now that some tweets are being used by prosecutors, are they going to be hesitant to use Twitter to organize in the same way in the future?
I mean, I think this is one of the things that critics have brought up is that, you know, the DA may be, you know, well within their legal bounds to subpoena such tweets or, you know, Facebook posts or something like that. What they're saying is that there's going to be a chilling effect on people participating in, you know, their right to protest or right to express themselves. But on the other hand, I think what legal experts would say is there's a, you know, huge difference between saying I disagree with the police not allowing us to go onto the bridge versus you know, the police have said do not come on the bridge, I'm going anyway. But I mean, I could definitely see how some people will be very cautious at this point of how they might express themselves, and I think that's where this free speech element comes into it. You know, there was one of the cases I highlighted out of the 4 subpoenas that were issued for Twitter accounts. One gentleman decided to go ahead and take the ACD rather than have to go through the legal process.
The plea bargain, basically.
I mean, you could call it it's a plea agreement in a way, but you don't admit guilt. Just basically you stay out of trouble for 6 months and your case is dismissed.
Has it ever worked the other way, that a defendant uses Twitter to demonstrate that the police did not warn them of something before they took an action?
I'm not so sure that Twitter would be the right forum for that. I mean, I think people have used video that they've published on YouTube, for instance, to kind of make that claim. You know, it's just Twitter's, I believe it's not exact enough. I mean, if you did not tweet that the police said, you know.
Another reminder that whatever you put out there is out there.
Indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Up next, the sky above and the mud, well, that's also above in roof farming.
My name is Fernanda. I'm the wife of a teacher. Budget cuts affected my husband's salary, so I'm picking up some part-time work. We're doing everything we can to make sure our kids eat today. Tomorrow, I just don't know. Fernanda, how'd I do?
Well, I usually fold the underwear first.
I meant the acting, but good to know.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
I look up to a lot of the older heads, you know, the innovators, the heads of the art movements of the past. They kept it really edgy, and like a lot of the Latin American muralists and Latin American artists, and their styles were very unique and new to their time. You know, somewhat controversial, but that's who I look up to mainly. Personally, I'm very excited about going to college. It's something new and it's something different than what I'm used to. I'm definitely going to be a little out of my element, but that's what makes it so exciting, is that, you know, it's something fresh. Well, there's so many opportunities that I think I could miss out on if I didn't go, you know? Getting into college takes planning and vision. You know, it's just like when I take a brick wall and turn it into a canvas for my art. Paintings help me realize that I've got what it takes.
We know that New York City's rooftops are an asset to solar entrepreneurs who've begun to generate electricity up there. But rooftop farming? Well, why not? The folks who brought the world's largest rooftop farm to Long Island City are now expanding to Brooklyn. They see it as a viable way not only to grow dinner, but to make a living. What's it like working up on the farm? Let us talk lettuce with Ben Flanner and Gwen Schantz, co-founders of the organic rooftop farm, the Brooklyn Grange. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So Gwen, spring came early this year. Is that affecting you guys?
It is. I kind of wish we had had the foresight to anticipate the early spring, or the non-winter, as it really has been.
Why? What could you have done?
We could have planted a bunch of greens. Although, to be honest, in farming, the lack of sunlight is really as big of a problem as the low temperatures. So in the wintertime, you really can't grow that much without additional lighting. So this warm winter, we could have grown a little bit, but probably not as much as we would have liked.
Our viewers are seeing a scene of some of your stuff. What are we looking at there?
We see tomatoes up on the stakes. We see a crop of cucumbers down on the south. We see kale, all sorts of lettuce mixes, eggplants, chard, kale, Lots of different crops.
Now, people who didn't know that we were talking about the Brooklyn Grange would think that that was a shot taken somewhere upstate, somewhere out in the Midwest, Ben, something like that. So tell us, how big was that space that we were looking at? It looked like we could see one of those rooftop water towers. Is that what that was?
Yeah, that was about 20,000 square feet, and that was half the farm. That was from the center, from a water tower.
And how big is the Queen site, if that's the biggest rooftop garden in the world?
It's 40,000 square feet, and please, we actually like to call it a farm. It's not a garden.
Not a garden.
It's a working farm,
Just
like any farm upstate. We grow
Yes.
vegetables, we sell them, and that's actually something that really differentiates us from most urban farms and gardens, is that we actually are a for-profit business, and we're trying to not only do something good for the environment and for the local food scene, but also to generate some economic activity and create jobs through urban farming.
So what are we looking at now? Oops, and that one just went away. So it's a business. So Ben, do you have migrant farm workers and the whole thing?
We have, exactly. We have a strong internship program. We have our team of core founders, and we have friends. People tend to the farm attracts very interesting people, and people tend to pop in and come in through the doors and come to our open days and get involved.
How much soil do you have up there? What does it weigh?
We brought in 1.2 million pounds
Wow.
of soil for this first farm, and we'll actually have more than that on our new farm that we're opening in Brooklyn this spring. And it sounds like a lot, but spread over 40,000 square feet, it really isn't that heavy. These are serious, large structures that we're dealing with. They've been checked out by a structural engineer, so we would never come in and just dump a bunch of soil on a roof and endanger the building.
Yeah,
it's
researched.
What building has that
checked
much
out.
surface area on its roof?
It's in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. It's called building number 3. It's 11 stories.
That's very romantic.
Yeah,
That's our
exactly.
new one, yeah.
That's how all the addresses work out. And if you look around, especially in Queens and Brooklyn and parts of Manhattan, there's dozens, maybe hundreds of buildings which fit the bill.
So you think there could be more farms
Definitely.
in New York City
Lots
on
more
top of roofs?
Absolutely.
And
That's the plan.
And energy and inquisition coming into our email inboxes. So
Yeah, every day we get requests from building owners who are interested in working with us. So we're constantly visiting new roofs and trying to see where the location of our next farm is going to be.
How about the bees? We're looking at some bees.
Yeah, we have 4 hives on our first farm. That's our beekeeper,
Chase.
He's not a spaceman, he's a beekeeper. And each of those hives has several dozen thousand bees in it, probably about 50 or 60,000 bees. And they produce about 50 pounds of honey per hive.
often more, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're expanding that. This summer, the people have spoken, the honey sold out so rapidly and it was a good success. So we're gonna have a new commercial apiary, up to 30 hives this summer, also in the Navy Yard.
I know there's been some concern expressed about the effect of the winterless winter and the early spring on bees. Are you seeing that?
They look okay. They look healthy. We'll do the full checkup in the next few weeks. But yes, what happens is they continue all their activities and they basically use up all their honey at a greater rate than they would if it was really cold and they hibernated.
How about pollution as a concern, air pollution on the vegetables? You know, organic vegetables, growing among the soot particles in New York City.
Right
Is this
above
what we
Northern Boulevard.
Exactly.
Yeah, we get this question a lot, and I think among the urban farming community, it's really a non-issue to us. We all eat this food. We find it very healthy. It certainly is much healthier and less contaminated than food that you'll see grown commercially on many farms across the U.S. where they're using heavy doses of pesticides and herbicides. I think the academics that we've spoken to who are kind of in the lab studying this stuff, anecdotally will tell us that it's not a problem as well. But we are working with a few friends and a couple of labs to really come up with some serious results so that we can officially put that question to bed. Yes.
But wash your vegetables just
Always
as
wash
you
your
would
vegetables.
in any other case.
Absolutely.
I guess a rooftop farm leads to a rooftop dinner party, huh?
Indeed.
Who's there? What is that?
We built a table out of reclaimed water tower wood, so we didn't have to use any stains or finishes on it, and it seats about 40 people. And we have evening events where the menu consists of vegetables from the farm, and it's a good chance to share the space with other people, have sunset dinners.
What's the most surprising thing that you grow in New York City?
Oh,
That's a great question.
agretti. It's a classic Italian salad crop that tastes slightly salty.
I was told 40 different kinds of tomatoes, yes?
Last year, that's what we had. This year, we're
Easily.
trying to actually bring that number down because it can get a little unwieldy if you have too much diversity. But we still, I think this year we do have about 20 different types of tomatoes alone. And then across the farm, we have at least 100 different types of vegetables.
We just planted about 4,500 tomato plants. We're starting them all at the farm on Northern that we've just seen the pictures of, and then come May, we'll take half of them to the new one at Navy Yard once that's ready.
How do you two come to this? Are you city kids? Did you grow up on farms? How about you, Gwen?
No and no. I'm from Massachusetts. I'm from a small town, and I grew up gardening with my mom just in the backyard. She would make me weed. I didn't like it, and over time it kind of grew on me, and one thing led to another, and here I am farming in New York City.
Garden, farm, but I want to live in New York. How about you?
Exactly.
I grew up in Wisconsin, kind of a similar story, gardening with my mother, making pickles when we were young with the cucumbers. And I have an engineering background. I came to New York and worked in financial analytical type jobs, and actually started to draw the draw towards farming was an interest in the vegetables and also the problem solving, and a chance to use some of those analytics towards something that's a lot more exciting than other things can be.
And who are your customers? Is there a section for your stuff in Gristedes, or how do you sell?
Not yet Gristedes, but we sell to restaurants, a couple dozen restaurants around town, and several farmers markets per week, and we also have a CSA, so we cover several areas.
How can people sign up for your CSA?
The best way to find us is by going to our website. It's brooklyngrangefarm.com, and we're pretty fast on the email, so shoot us an email.
That's
and
right
we'll
on
get
the
right
top
back
of the
to you.
website right now.
Yeah.
CSA, Community Supported Agriculture.
Yes.
That's right. You buy, right now, this time of year, you buy a membership, and then every week throughout the season, you get a bag of fresh vegetables. It's a great deal.
Yeah.
Are restaurants becoming dependent on you? Certain
Definitely.
restaurants that want to deal in fresh and local?
We hook them with our salad mixes, and they definitely become dependent.
They love us. We've had a few chefs tell us that we have the best greens in New York, and I don't like to brag, but I'll cling on to that one.
You want to shout out some names of either farmers markets or restaurants?
Absolutely. We're at the Williamsburg Smorgasburg on Saturdays. It's a really cool market. It has a lot of prepared foods, and then we're selling fresh vegetables.
It's at
a
North
great place.
6th and Kent.
Yeah, North 6th at Kent. You can take the ferry there now, which is really a great weekend activity. Then we have a bunch of restaurants.
Yeah, you can find our greens at Vesta in our neighborhood in Astoria, at Roberta's in Bushwick, at Northeast Kingdom in Bushwick.
Lupa downtown.
West Village.
Fatty Crab, Fatty Q.
Mm-hmm.
I gather you have internship programs so city kids can become farmers.
Yes.
Tell us about it.
This year we especially have a real nice crop from NYU. It's a credit program.
Is that your intern group?
That's actually that's a school
young.
group. Those
Okay.
are high schoolers that came to us through our education program. It's called City Growers. We started the farm as a for-profit business, and within weeks of opening the first farm, we had a bunch of teachers calling us asking if they could come bring their students for visits, and we couldn't say no. Of course, we want kids to come and learn on the farm. And within a couple of months, we realized that running an education program is no joke, and it's not something you just do on the side in addition to your farming. So we started this nonprofit, and it's doing great. Last year we had about 3,000 kids come visit the farm. This year we're planning on reaching even more students.
It's a good example on how we have to wear entrepreneurial hats. We have to constantly be looking at the system and how it's working and solving problems and reacting, because we're definitely breaking new territory with a project like this, with a commercial rooftop farm.
Yeah.
So.
And
Figuring it out as we go.
And what is that, a still?
That is a vegetable oil filter for Chase's vegetable converted.
Our beekeeper has a Volkswagen Golf that he runs on veggie grease, and that's how you filter veggie grease so that you can run your car on it.
That's what all the rum runners from the 1930s used to say.
Right, exactly.
Probably do a lot of things with that machine.
What's the biggest hurdle to making this work?
I think labor is a big challenge. There's so many things that we have to do, both as farmers and, as Ben said, as entrepreneurs running a business. Half the time we're up on the farm getting our hands dirty and working with the soil and the bees and the chickens and the vegetables. And the other half of the time we're in the office.
Negotiating, doing sales, doing our taxes.
Getting insurance, all of these things that take forever, and then planning and building our new farms. So it's kind of a constant race with ourselves to keep up with the business. And we're really looking forward to expanding and hiring more staff and employing our friends who want to be urban farmers, but also building the business.
How many people do you employ?
Currently, there's 5 of us who are pretty much full-time.
A few jobs, usual jobs from New York. And
it's
do
a
you
small
raise money?
business.
Do you borrow from banks? Do you use Kickstarter?
Yes.
All of the above.
And this, we're actually completing our capital raise right now for the Navy Yard farm, and we're raising loans, debt, selling equity in the company, and running a Kickstarter program.
Yeah,
so.
we have a couple dozen investors, and we're investors. So.
And you had time to come to this show. It's incredible.
We're out of here.
All this,
we got to run.
Right here, after you tell us what's in your branded barbecue sauce.
Oh, hot sauce.
Hot sauce.
That's Ben's secret.
Oh, a puree of all sorts of peppers from the farm, herbs, onions, and a couple other secrets.
And that's sold in the stores under a brand name?
We sell it mostly at our markets yet, but there's definitely plans to expand because the demand and the interest seems to be there.
You know, I remember when kids would be taken to the Queens Farm Museum.
Oh, yeah.
As kind of a relic.
Great
now
place.
they can go to a farm in Queens and one in Brooklyn that is not a museum.
We had a story. There was a Cub Scout group walking from Flushing to Times Square. And they were coming down Northern Boulevard, and the leader of the pack knew about our farm, and he didn't tell the kids. So he just kind of pulled over and said, guys, let's go in here. And they popped up on the roof, and it's definitely pretty special to see all the little faces and the excitement.
It's a real urban adventure.
A getaway right in the middle of the city. Thank you both. Good luck with it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week's show. We roll out a new episode Wednesday nights at 7:30, or see us anytime at CUNY.TV. And check out my daily radio show weekday mornings at 10 on WNYC. Tomorrow morning, your reactions to the Supreme Court Obamacare hearings. That's on 93.9 FM and AM 820 WNYC. Talk to you then.